Hi, I'm Mick Barry. Welcome to our 3-Minute Therapy podcast. I'm with Dr. Michael Edelstein, who wrote the book 3-Minute Therapy, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life. It's based on rational motive behavior therapy, or REBT for short. REBT began in the early 1950s, formulated by Dr. Albert Ellis when he realized that he was treating people that weren't getting any better using Freudian analysis, and he came up with his own system to help people. It was originally called rational therapy, then rational motive therapy, then rational motive behavior therapy. And the idea behind REBT is that it's not the things that happen to us that upset us, it's the way we think about them that makes us emotionally upset. And we're talking about events that happen to us that don't physically harm us. When we encounter something that's difficult or something that's disappointing or conflicts with what we want, if we demand to get what we want, then we start to drive ourselves crazy. Whereas if we can accept the situation that things don't have to go our way, we can continue to try to get what we want, but things don't have to work out the way we want, then we end up eliminating anxiety, depression, anger, rage, all sorts of mental problems that get in the way of us enjoying ourselves. Is there something else you wanted to add, Michael?
Yeah, there are a few things I'd like to add, although that was pretty complete, Mick. At one point you said that we're talking about events that don't physically harm us, but even when events physically harm us, we have a choice. We don't have to disturb ourselves emotionally about that.
That's true, but I have a question about that. Suppose I'm being tortured, like whipped or something where it's very physically painful. I think what you're saying is, yeah, that's a situation you want to avoid at all costs. But even if you're experiencing it, it's possible to make the situation worse by telling yourself this should not be happening.
Right. And my main point, though, is about the causality, that if you're emotionally upset about any kind of pain, no matter how severe it is, I'm not saying you're going to not be emotionally upset. I'm saying the reason you're emotionally upset is because if you're thinking about the pain, not the pain itself.
Okay, well, how could somebody be tortured and not be emotionally upset? I suppose if somebody was told, look, if I hit you with your hand with a hammer, I'll give you $1 million, then when their hand is hit with a hammer, they would feel good about it because they're getting $1 million.
Yeah, but again, I'm not saying you're not going to be emotionally upset no matter how rational you are with physical pain. I'm just saying that the causality is when you are emotionally upset, it's caused by your thinking. The other thing I wanted to add to what you said, Mick, it's not only our emotions that are caused by our thinking, but also it's our behaviors. So our emotions and behaviors are caused by our thinking.
And by that, you mean our decisions that determine how we behave?
Uh, yeah, and how we, yes, exactly. It's our thinking that determines how we behave and how we emote.
Yeah, so if I'm going somewhere and I cross the street, I'm crossing the street because I decide I want to get to where I'm going.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So today's topic is when not to use REBT. And I brought this up because I, for one, can think in extreme ways, and I have in the past. I try not to think in extreme ways now, but it's possible to become an REBT nerd and want to apply it to every situation and every time you're encountering anything to employ REBT. And there's some situations where it's a pretty good idea to not even worry about being entirely rational as long as you're not having any goals disrupted by being irrational. Being irrational is not necessarily something to avoid. And the situation I can think of is if I'm falling in love with a woman and or if I am in love with a woman and she's praising me up and down, I'm not going to tell her, well, there's no such thing as a good or bad person, so don't rate me. Because REBT discourages rating people in total about their opinion of themselves. But if somebody is admiring me to no end, I'm not going to dispel them of that notion because there's nothing bad that's going to come out of it. Why not let them enjoy the fantasy and have a good time, and I can enjoy it too. You have anything to say about that, Michael?
Yes, as long as you realize it's a fantasy, you can still enjoy the fantasy, as you said.
I think as you're saying that, I think that even makes it more fun because then you can laugh about how deliriously happy you are and see that, oh, this is silly, and you could appreciate being silly on top of actually being silly. So there is another component, another dimension to it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Can you think of another instance, Michael, where it's good not to apply REBT?
Yes, in terms of thinking about the future, rather than thinking I can't do X, Y, or Z, it would be better to think I can do X, Y, and Z, even though you don't have any evidence since you haven't done it yet, but you still might be capable of doing it. And it's good to have the optimistic thought that I can do it and I will do it.
I don't see how that's ruling out REBT though, because REBT says eliminate the demands. So if you're saying I can do this, uh, I don't see that there's a demand there.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And what's the demand with love?
What's the demand with love?
Yeah.
Oh, if somebody, well, it could be that, oh, I'm not all that great, so don't look on me that way because you're only going to become disappointed. You must not. Well, the demand, I think, with when not to use REBT is I must not be irrational.
Uh, You mean
And
if you're disturbed about being in love?
yeah, or if somebody else is praising me up and down, you must not be irrational. Let
Right.
the woman be irrational. That would be the demand.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Now, the instance that you mentioned, if I want to try something, then not using REBT, I don't see why that would be a case in which we don't use REBT. If I want to become a really good basketball player, I can use REBT in that instance and say, well, I don't have to become a good basketball player, but I want to. I'm going to try it and see.
Yeah. Right. And in saying I can become a good basketball player, I would say maybe a better way to put it is it's unrealistic, but not irrational. There's not necessarily a demand there.
Yeah, so I don't see that as an example of when not to use REBT.
Right.
But I'll think of another one when not to use REBT. If I'm working on being more rational and doing my ABC exercise, and for those of you who aren't familiar with that, Michael, I think you have a demonstration of that on YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So what's it titled? Do you know?
No.
Okay, well, if you put Michael Edelstein ABC exercise, I think something will come up. But anyway, if I'm trying to become more rational and I'm working rigorously at it, then I can only expect so much work out of myself for it. And so after I've worked and worked and worked at it, then I think it's a good idea to just rest, not worry about being irrational.
Right.
Now, I can think of an instance where I was having a great deal of anxiety over something, Michael, and I remember you pointing out that I was telling myself I must not have anxiety. So I gave myself a homework assignment to have anxiety for 24 hours to prove that I could live with it so that I eliminated the demand, I must not have anxiety. So that was an instance of using REBT and not using REBT. I was using REBT to prove to myself that I can have anxiety, but I was not using REBT in trying to eliminate the primary anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Let me see if I can think of another instance when not to use REBT. Well, if you're just doing something and enjoying yourself or spending time with somebody, I think it's a good idea to forget about REBT and not worry about it and just enjoy yourself. We don't have to go around always thinking, where's my demand? How can I get rid of it? I think that's a little obsessive.
Yeah, another example of not using REBT is with someone else. So if someone else says they're depressed, I wouldn't recommend using REBT unless they want you to use REBT. So a good strategy there is if a friend says I'm depressed, a good strategy would be to say, well, I have some suggestions to help you with your depression. Would you be interested?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because it's very possible, in fact, I'd say likely, that if somebody else is irrational and they don't want any help, or you're offering them unsolicited help before they are willing to take it, that they will escalate their disturbance by interpreting what you're doing as thinking that they must not be depressed or they must not be angry. Would you say that that's true, Michael?
Well, that's certainly possible
I
that a person's thinking that, or they could be thinking, I must help them.
Yeah, well, that's true. You could be thinking yourself, I must help them. So that would be using REBT to allow somebody to avoid demanding somebody else not be rational. So that's using REBT for yourself and not using it for somebody else. But I do think it's likely if somebody else, let's say, is angry at you, and if you give them something to where they start thinking to themselves, you're telling me I must not be angry, I think they're only going to become angrier.
They might, yes.
No, I think it's likely that they would. You don't think it's likely?
I don't know. I haven't taken a survey, but
Oh,
it's possible it's likely.
well, I know that if I am angry, but I start telling myself I must not be angry, I get angrier. And I think it's a human response to not want to have restrictions play not we don't feel good about having believing demands. We know that, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that if you're already demanding something and then you tell yourself, I must not be making a demand, then you're going to drive yourself even crazier. Would you agree with that?
Yep,
Yeah.
definitely.
So I think it's very easy for somebody to interpret it, if you're trying to help somebody not be angry, that you're demanding them not to be angry. And if they start thinking you're demanding them not to be angry, I do think they will get angrier.
Right. Unless you're an REBT therapist, and then you might ask if they want help not being angry because you're not demanding that they not be angry, but you're concerned about them and
Yeah.
you know a way to help them.
Yeah, so I think the conversation we're having about when not to use REBT, it's room for a wide open discussion because there are instances when it's great to use it. In fact, I think most of the time when we're mentally disturbed or others are mentally disturbed, it's great to use it. But then there are instances when it's a good idea not to use it, and those are open to interpretation and determining when is a good idea and when is not a good idea. Can you think of any other instances, Michael?
I know, but I would say that when it is a good idea is when you're disturbed, you're disturbing yourself emotionally. And probably in most cases, it's not a good idea when someone else is disturbing themselves emotionally, because most people don't want free therapy from you unless they ask.
Yeah, and you would say it's not a good idea. How come?
Because, as I said, most people probably wouldn't be interested in that.
But what do
They
you
wouldn't be interested when I have a session with someone, it's 45 minutes to explain the REBT, the ins and outs of REBT, how to use it, and things like that. So most people who just friends or acquaintances won't be interested in that.
what do you think the outcome of that would be if you insist on offering it to them when they don't want
They're not very good.
it? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I don't think they would like it.
Well,
Like you
okay.
could insist someone eat more healthily or insist someone get exercise, but if that's not your role as a professional, then probably most people wouldn't appreciate that. Would you agree?
Well, I'd agree, but I was trying to pin you down on how specifically would they react if they don't like it. But I think you're telling me is you don't know how they would react, but it wouldn't be pleasant, whatever it is.
Yeah, probably wouldn't be positive.
Yeah.
They
Okay.
probably wouldn't say, "Well, thank you for your help. Tell me more."
And that's as far as you go as your speculation on how their behavior would manifest by their irritation.
Yeah. Another time not to use REBT is with semantic precision with others. So we've had at least one or more podcasts on semantic precision, and that means avoid the use of absolutes like shoulds, musts, can standards, and awfuls and terribles. But when someone else says you should do this, you should do that, it's probably not a good idea to try to help them speak semantically precisely.
So I think what we're saying here is that human beings are imperfect, and it's good to be able to accept other people as being imperfect and not feel you have to make them more rational, because if you do, then you're going to probably encounter lots of very difficult situations with many people. So it's a good idea to accept other people are rational and move on. If I'm driving a car and somebody cuts me off, I can pretty much bet that if I antagonize them, they're only going to become upset. So it's a good idea to remember, well, other people can be irrational. Let's say somebody cuts me off intentionally and then slows down and honks their horn and tries to engage in a fight. It's a good idea to get them out of my life as soon as possible.
Yes, and you're more likely to antagonize them. If you have a must, they must not cut me off. And that was going to make you angry and more likely to do something in return, which is not a good idea.
Yeah. Let me think. Let me see if I can think of one other instance when not to use REBT. Um, well, sometimes when we're executing something, like let's say I'm a baseball player and I go to bat and I'm trying to get a hit, is it beneficial for me to think, well, I don't have to get a hit, but I really want to get a hit here? Is it worth it for me to run REBT in my mind in that circumstance?
I think so, because there's something in baseball called choking, where you go on a downslide in your batting, and often it's because you have a must there. I must not strike out again. This would be awful, terrible, and horrible. So it would be good to use REBT on yourself then.
Yeah, oh, I just thought of something else, or this is maybe just defining it more clearly. If I'm engaged in an activity, I think REBT is a reflection. We are reflecting on our thoughts when we employ REBT. Would you say that's correct, Michael?
Yeah, it involves abstract thinking, thinking about our thinking.
Yeah. And if I'm engaged in an activity that's particularly enjoyable, uh, it's a good idea to just allow myself to be immersed in that enjoyable activity and don't worry about thinking about my thinking, but just enjoying the activity. So that would be a time not to use REBT.
Unless you're worried, and then you could use it on yourself and not worry.
Right, but if I'm engaged in an activity, I was including, or within the term engagement, I was defining that as being immersed in it and not, if I'm worried about it, then I'm reflecting on it. But if I'm immersed in it, I'm not even thinking about doing it. I'm just doing it and having a good time. So just let it fly.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of having a good time, I think we've had enough of a good time. We're running out of time. And so I'd like to thank you, Mick, for that great topic. And I thought it was very productive. And I'd like to thank Chris Rossini, our tech engineer. Uh, whose reactions I've been enjoying watching during this. And comment below if you have comments or questions. Give us a thumbs up if you gain from this. Volunteer if you'd like to be a guest. We had a guest last week discussing sleep. And I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, psychologist and author. My co-host is Mick Berry, REBT expert. And subscribe to the 3 Minute Therapy podcast to do what, Mick?
To stay on the rational side of life and the rational side of REBT.